What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and let's talk about the D&D Content Creator Summit. I'm going to try to break this down in as many ways as possible, and obviously I can only provide you the insight from my experience having attended in person, which I should say up front, there was an in-person and a virtual version of this. Now, if you're unfamiliar or haven't seen what's going on online and are very curious, what am I talking about? In early March, several folks, myself obviously included, received an email that was titled WotC Summit Invitation. And basically it said, in December of last year, the team attended PAX Unplugged. Something that came up consistently in these conversations was a desire from you, the community we serve, to have more chances to see Wizard staff in person, more chances to provide feedback on how our team can improve the experience of making D&D content, and more chances to see what's next for D&D. The D&D Creator Relations Team, which is something I want to address, right? The D&D Creator Relations Team, I also may refer to them as the Community Relations Team or the Community Team, has been cooking up some new ideas for how we can best meet these goals, and we'd love to invite you to the first step. We're excited to invite you to our office on April 3rd to attend our team's first Content Creator Summit. This event will be a chance to see some of what our teams have been working on, including the D&D Virtual Tabletop and the D&D Rules Update, ask questions, give feedback, and connect with members of our studio and content teams. There will be no content requirements, nor will Wizards be taking or using any footage or recordings for their own purposes. Any information we share with you during this summit, you are free to share with your community, and then we'll comp travel and per diem and blah, blah, blah. So first of all, what I want to address is, one, what kind of we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about my experience attending the event itself, what the sort of agenda was. There's basically three kind of major things. I'm going to do my best to clear up a lot of the confusion and discourse around it, as you may have seen a variety of things taken out of context or just completely blown out of proportion here on the internet. And then, again, give you my feelings on what happened and what's going forward. So before, I think what we're going to do is we're going to start with the D&D Beyond community update. Now, an update was posted on the 7th. By the way, the event happened on April 3rd, so a little over 2 weeks ago. And I want to talk about what they said in the community update, because that will kind of give you an idea of where they're coming from their perspective, and that will hopefully help us frame the discussion we're going to have here today. So, that being said, what is a Content Creator Summit? This is not something new. These summit concepts exist in a variety of other mediums, right? Very popular in video games, tech, even things like tools, DIY, beauty. They're a commonplace thing. Now, this summit is a little bit different in a couple of aspects, and I'll get into that. But normally what this means is if you pick some video game, so let's just choose Call of Duty, for example, Activision invites a bunch of people out. They'll usually invite people that are like streamers, content creators, people that make guides, whatever, a bunch of people. They all get invited out to like the Activision studio. Typically that is comp. They'll cover their hotel stay, their plane ticket. They'll cover kind of a per diem, and then you'll usually get some kind of swag or something there. They'll bring you in to talk about whatever the latest thing is, whether that's a new expansion, a new seasonal content thing, whatever. You usually maybe even get hands-on to play around in it yourself. And then they'll usually have some sort of dinner, Q&A, whatever session with the folks involved. And that'll be because you're a creator, you have a community, you have your finger on the pulse of what everybody wants to see. And they'll say like, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. They might show you some future content or talk about that stuff. And you kind of have a back and forth conversation about this looks good, this looks bad, whatever. You're also typically under some form of contract, whether that's a non-disclosure agreement saying that you can't talk about this stuff. And what's interesting is that even if the stuff that you went to see early, even if that ultimately gets released in the game at some point, you might never be able to talk about it ever. You could be possibly put under some sort of content policy in that you need to release so X amount of tweets, take pictures, make videos, whatever, while you're attending the event. Or you might have something like an embargo that says like you can release stuff that happened here, but nobody can release it until X date, and then everybody can flood the market with whatever they're working on. This was different in that we had none of that. We had no NDA, we signed no contracts. All we basically did was they said, "Would you like to attend?" You responded to the email and said, "Yes, I would." And then they say, "Okay, give us your information so we can find an airport local to you to get you a ticket to fly out here." Now, some people were throwing around the concepts that there was embargoes and you couldn't post anything until Thursday. And let me clear that up for you. We were allowed to record anything we wanted, video or audio, but not for release purposes to the internet. We were only allowed to do that for the purposes of taking notes and like doing videos like this, writing blogs or articles or what have you. You could have that for your own note purposes, but you couldn't actually release the audio or the video. And you could take pictures, but they wanted to have everybody wait until Thursday, the Thursday after the event. So the event was on, what is that, Monday? I think it was the 6th. They wanted to wait for everybody to release things. Or maybe it was the 5th. They wanted to have everybody, the 6th. Wait till then for safety and security purposes. And that's kind of the first piece I want to talk about this. And we're going to look at the community update because it'll help frame that. And it might be confusing, but it's important that we discuss this because it had a major impact on the mental health of a lot of the folks attending this, to the point where some people made the conscious decision to not go for one reason or another, or are questioning whether they wanted to even continue to stay in this content creation sphere at all because of the discourse that happened on the internet. So let's go ahead and take a look at the D&D Beyond community update here. Right? It says this past Monday, again meaning the 3rd, we held our first ever content creator summit of 2023, which does make it seem like they're looking to do more, and I've heard there might be one at Gen Con, so we'll see. It was a first step in an ongoing conversation with our players, creators, and community. Although we need more time to connect with attendees, complete a full retrospective, and confirm next steps to transform feedback into action, we want to share some preliminary thoughts from the team. Before we dig in, we'd like to say thank you to everyone who joined us, whether in person or virtually. You took time from work, family, and friends, and some of you even joined us globally in completely different time zones. We truly appreciate your energy, focus, and passion. This was a complex and challenging day, but we ultimately cannot grow as a company without these types of conversations. We're thankful for your push to have them, and our aim is to show our thanks for that energy by continuing the process. So what made the day challenging? We did. We moved fast in planning this event so that the community knew what we were walking the walk, not just talking the talk, and in prioritizing speed, there were unintended consequences. So when they say this, what this is in reference to is the OGL happened in January. We had the series of Kyle Brink interviews attempting to clarify some of the information, and then the SRD, and around that time frame, the SRD 5.1 got dumped into Creative Commons. That was supposed to be step 1, and I do agree it was a good step, of moving us towards how can Wizards of the Coast rebuild the trust with the community. I think a lot of people, myself included, have said that, you'll eventually maybe get to, maybe a level playing field, but the trust will never be truly earned back 100%. Nobody will forget, or maybe some people already have, but in my mind, I will never forget the OGL situation, and it will always be something needling in the back of my mind. Like, if something comes up and it looks a little off, I'll be like, well, they did that, so maybe it's not out of the realm of possibility. But this Content Creator Summit was another step in the direction of following up on the OGL. So, and that'll help explain why some people were confused and about level setting expectations, which we'll get to. But that's what this is. This is, hey, we want to take another step to kind of foster and grow things with the community. So we're going to invite people out to a special summit to teach them and show them what we're working on. By the way, I believe this is the first time Wizards of the Coast has ever done a summit like this, and this may be the first time it's ever happened in the TTRPG sphere at all. All right, so unintended consequences. Let's go from there. All right. One of our initial goals was to offer a vision into the future of D&D and collect your feedback to help us shape it. But the event schedule we prepared focused on this far too much. We realized that you can't talk about the future without acknowledging the past and feeling secure about the present, and we're grateful that you raised concerns about the lack of clear, dedicated space for those conversations in our plan. We're glad we were able to pivot to AMAs around a variety of concerns, and what we took away from them was invaluable. However, the burden of starting most of those conversations was on you, meaning the creators, and we need to change that. In the future, we will clearly communicate topics with our guests in advance and then adjust our plans based on your feedback. This will help all parties be better prepared and go into greater depth on topics and have more of their expectations met. So the reason why that's important is, as I said, this is supposed to be kind of the next step in a genesis, in a road to recovery for Wizards of the Coast attempting to rebuild their broken trust. So this is, they talked about that, and you heard from what I read you in that initial email that like part of this was supposed to be conversations about connecting, providing feedback, and all of those things. And that was kind of the impression that a lot of us got, is that, yeah, we're maybe going to get to see some future stuff about what they're working on. But ultimately, the main goal, a lot of us thought, was to sit down and have that real conversation, talk about things like the OGL, how they're going to do better next time, prevent things from, these kind of situations from happening again. And part of it, to that point about like setting expectations, is we really didn't get a lot of info up front. We had that first email, and then I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, about the week before the event, we got like a loose agenda sent in the email to us. And basically what it said is, we're going to have an opening remarks, at the Wizards of the Coast office. We're going to have a 2-hour session in the morning at the Wizards of the Coast office. Some of that for the online folks would be called office hours, which was like a one-on-one conversation. Again, I can't speak to it too much because I didn't attend digitally. We'd have a lunch break, and then we'd have a 4.5-hour afternoon session. So in my opinion, I always had taken it as, okay, the morning session is we're going to go like maybe see the virtual tabletop because we'll be in the Wizard's office and they can police it, so we can like see that and have a tour and whatever else. And then that 4.5-hour afternoon session, I thought, was where we were really going to dive into like what we're going to talk about like, OGL, future content, how, like really have a true dialogue back and forth. And that's what I assumed that 4.5, that's a big chunk. So I figured what that was going to be. However, that was not the case. Let's jump back to our D&D Beyond community update and continue on. Our virtual experience left a lot to be desired. A variety of issues made this a negative experience for our virtual attendees. While we've learned a ton about how to improve in the future, we want to recognize the frustration of our virtual attendees as we fell short on proper planning and dealt with technical problems. So, to that point, let's take a second to address that. Now, again, like I said, I only have the in-person experience, but being in person, I can answer some of this because, one, they streamed the event in some instances. Obviously, the office hours, like I said, I can't discuss because the office hours were happening when those of us in person were demoing the virtual tabletop. But then when we got into like Q&A sessions, it was a joint session where they streamed it. They had like a singular microphone like here, and then the whole room full of creators. Now in the room, you could hear me if I'm talking like from the back of the room, and if I project or I'm loud, you could hear me. And then there were people online, they couldn't hear what was being said. So if the people moderating and answering the questions didn't speak up and reiterate the question, the people online couldn't hear it. And unless you had somebody who was really good in moderation, saying, okay, we're going to take a question from in the room, then we'll take a question from online, the people online were just basically ignored. And unfortunately, that's kind of just the nature of the way that would work. Like, if you have a room of 15 people, and then a bunch of people online, and someone asks a question, and then somebody sitting right next to the person answering it goes, well, what about this? Then that person will probably likely pivot to answer that question, whereas the folks online were not speaking up and talking. They were typing questions and things digital, typing them out, whereas I could just be like, well, hang on, what about that? And then you could just pivot to answer me because I'm there and ignore the digital completely. Also, as far as like scoping goes, there was about 30 of us or so there in person. I really have no concept of how many people were online on the digital side. I thought I saw at some point a number in the 70s range, but that could be, whether that could be things like the people running it, digital moderators and stuff like that. So I don't really know, but it looks like it was probably close to the same 30, if not double that. But they hosted this event via Microsoft Teams, which is essentially the Microsoft platform version of like Zoom or Discord. And a lot of corporate companies use this because they're so invested in the Microsoft platform. But I would warrant to guess that a lot of the folks that don't have like corporatized jobs probably maybe even never heard of Microsoft Teams or had to download it just for this event. And it's unfortunate because there are Microsoft Teams related tools and avenues they could have used that would have largely improved a lot of the issues. For example, at a point in this, they were saying, hey, so-and-so, type out your question. And that person was literally typing the question as the person in the room prompted them to say it. And then they're reading the question as it's coming in live. And if anyone has ever streamed online, you need to screen your questions because you don't actually know what you're going to get when you receive it. So something like using this as a Teams live broadcast that will automatically shut off the mics and cameras of the digital people you don't want to hear, and then will allow them to submit questions in cases anonymously if they'd prefer, and then send them all up in a queue that you can scroll through and pick and choose the questions you want. That's a super simple option that could have fixed a lot of the problems there. The only other downside is something that we'll talk about here in the community update bit in just a sec, is that having the digital version on the exact same day as the in-person one was probably a mistake. Now, you could dedicate an entire team to handling the digital side, but let's say they decide to prioritize like Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford at the in-person. That would mean that the digital folks, if it was the same day, don't get that same experience. And if you want them to truly feel like it's just a digital version of the in-person, you'd need to devote time to have both groups attend both days. So I think you probably have to split it out and just do a digital version one day and an in-person one the other day. Maybe you put everybody in an embargo. You can't post anything until the third day so that nobody feels like they got priority. That's something logistically that they need to figure out, but either way. So that's something that you need to consider about how you would want to handle the digital versus the in-person. The other side of it is you'll never have enough room in person or online to bring everybody you want. So somebody ultimately, unfortunately, is going to have to be left out. Whether the folks that get invited, if there's a second one, are the same folks that were invited to the first one remains to be seen. You'll never know. But we'll find out, as time goes on. So the other side of that, I should say, which I don't think I really got to, is that the groups that they picked to invite to both, which is important that I say, it was a very diverse group of people that are a diverse group of content creators from a variety of different walks of life and backgrounds. So you had a really good grasp on, having some representation from all aspects of the community. And they grabbed people, whether they were like a YouTuber like me, someone who just streams on Twitch, someone who just makes TikToks, even somebody who maybe is an author, worked on official WotC products, maybe just on their own Kickstarters, the DMs Guild, maybe, they are just someone who makes Twitter posts about Dungeons and Dragons. They grabbed a wide variety of people. And again, some people that have been in the department and the industry for a long time, some people that are relatively new, and the follower counts and things varied. So it was a really good group of people that were kind of all over the place. And that was really good because you could get a lot of different unique takes, opinions, and things coming out at the WotC team. And I think that was a huge credit to the content creation team or the creator relations team, in that they did grab a really good selection of people so that you had the diversity when it came to the answers, and like everybody's coming at it from a different background, perspective, life experience, and that really helps to give you a holistic view of everything. And I think that was really good. So that's something I do have to commend. And another thing to also consider is this was not a cheap thing for Wizards of the Coast, right? You devoted basically your entire staff for a whole day. You paid out a bunch in, per diem and travel and stuff. So in that aspect, they are showing a lot of like effort in trying to do this. I mean, it wasn't cheap to do it. So again, there was swag given out, which we'll talk about at a point. And I heard that the digital folks also are getting swag mailed to them as well. So, they made an effort to try to make this a special kind of event and take it seriously. However, as we're saying, it seems like the speed to get it out kind of made the quality not as good as it could have been. All right, moving on. Some of these issues arose because they were new processes for our teams. Many of these issues arose because we tried to do too much. As we reflect on the summit, here are a few initial and broad takeaways we'd like to share. Running a digital/physical event meant that the experience was subpar for both. Moving forward, we'll carefully consider those experiences and explore alternative approaches. It's kind of what I was talking about. Conversations start better from a shared understanding. The topics you pushed for were important to have, but we should have been better prepared for them. In the future, we'll give you an opportunity to weigh in on the agenda of events like these ahead of time. That, again, would have been huge. Rather than just saying morning session and afternoon session, morning session broke it into sections A and B, and this is what they'll be. Afternoon session into blah, blah, blah. And then people could say, like, hey, I really have no interest in attending these, maybe, so I'll pass and maybe hand my in-person ticket on to somebody else, maybe, right? Or like, hey, did you think about maybe what about this? And they change the agenda to meet what people want to talk about. And you best believe that if they do another one of the sections in the next one absolutely should be like a lessons learned piece from this event. Like all of the things, not just like the logistical things we're talking about now, but the stuff that people brought up specifically, like show us how you've improved on that. We need to come to you, whether virtually at conventions or other location fans already gather. Updates on what these events will look like. So they're saying, like, rather than also just doing these specific events, they should go to places where fans are already gathering to have an effort to meet them, whether it's online or at conventions. And I do think that part of that will be something along the lines of, like, hey, everybody's going to be at Gen Con, or a bunch of people are going to be at Gen Con, or PAX Unplugged, or a bunch of various conventions will go there and have a presence there so that even if it's not something like a specific, unique creator summit event like this, you can still be there and still have that correlation and dialogue with us. This was our first steps into events like this, but future steps will be more focused on conversation, streamlined, compact, and clear to improve the experience and value the time of everyone involved, which is exactly what we're talking about here. We would again like to express our loud and clear support and appreciation for all our attendees. Their points of view are valuable to us as a company. We welcome constructive and open feedback about any action Wizards of the Coast takes in the events that we plan, but we'll always encourage that the feedback be directed at Wizards and never at individuals. Talk about that in a sec. Online harassment has no place in our game. Spaces or values. Thank you for Monday. Here's an email to reach out for more conversation. We're genuinely excited about where we'll go from here. Keep an eye on the space for more information. So this might seem a little out of left field to those of you not kind of directly involved with it, but online harassment has no place in our game, space, or values. So for those of you who don't know, there was a lot of name calling, belittling, gaslighting, in some cases harassment, doxing, personal attacks, all are related to just people attending this event. And it all happened in that time frame from pretty much early March to early April, all before the Content Creator Summit even happened. Just saying you were attending this summit painted like a target on your back. And for some people, it was a lot worse than others. So I can give you my experience, which was, thankfully not as bad as other people's, but I made a short video that said, like, hey, I'm going to the summit, because people were like, hey, are you going? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to be attending. And I ultimately took that video down because I feel like I provided too much information about when the event was going to be and where. So I took that video down, and I'll explain why in a second. But even in the time that short video was up, I was getting comments. Again, I've been doing YouTube for a while, so, errant, and less than ideal comments are not a commonplace thing. But, comments about being a corporate shill, being a buyout, selling all of my integrity, 30 pieces of silver this, 30 pieces of silver that. And regardless of, being somebody who was a very staunch advocate for open D&D and trying to keep everybody abreast on what was going on during the OGL and, helping to lead, with other creators, the D&D Beyond movement and all this other stuff, that didn't matter. The second that I said I was going to attend this, I apparently threw out all of my principles, morals, and values to just become a corporate shill for Wizards of the Coast. Now, influencer is not a negative term, but it's being used negatively here. People are being called clout chasers and shills and all these other really less than, ideal names. But it wasn't just me. It was a ton of basically anybody who said they were attending. And some people were getting personally attacked from people saying things like, you don't deserve to go. How dare they pick you? They didn't send so-and-so. What's that about? But then also people just like using this as an opportunity to just go after people, share their personal information, dox them. If they wanted this to just be an open Q&A with everybody, they would have allowed us to live stream, or they would have just live streamed it live on the internet and had it be an open AMA where you could just type out whatever you wanted. This was a small knit thing, but this is what these summits are like. So you invite a certain group of people, you have them talk about stuff, and then they share what they can share. Like I said, we were allowed to share anything that was shared with us as long as we basically did it in like a video essay format like this. You could have done it in like a just chatting live stream, in an article that you posted, live tweeting, whatever you wanted to do. But you were allowed to share that, which, like I said, they could have put us under an NDA and then said you can't talk about any of it. And then realistically, probably not a lot of people would have shown up for that because they wanted to have an open dialogue. But WotC did that on purpose, because if they hid everything behind some sort of contract where you couldn't speak about it, that would have unfortunately made it seem like you're being less trustworthy. Now, again, like I said, that's standard practice for these summits, but because they're doing this as an opportunity to build trust, they wanted to allow everybody to kind of speak freely. But like I said, there were some people who, due to the discourse and shit that they received from this, were like, I might just stop, like, leave the D&D TTRPG sphere entirely because this toxic hatred is just, it's too much. I'm out. And I saw it even translating to other things. Like, I made a review of the D&D movie, and I saw somebody comment on it something along the lines of like, well, he got invited to the D&D Content Creator Summit, so I'd be wary about anything he says about the D&D movie. He was probably paid by Wizards of the Coast to speak positively of it, so you can't really trust his opinion on anything. And I've done my best over the years to give you very open and honest opinions on anything related to anything that I talk about, but it immediately colored me as this, sellout. So, like, that's kind of the mentality a lot of people had going in. And ultimately, some of the conversations that you might have seen, or the talk about how we sort of, and it was mentioned in the article, where we kind of brought the conversation to our own AMA, separate from what Wizards of the Coast was talking about, was because of, and largely came from the fact that, like, if all it seemed out front like they were basically just going to use this as like a PR stunt to talk about the virtual tabletop and the 2024 rules update, with almost no time at all planned out on the agenda to have feedback and an open dialogue, which was not part of any of those sessions initially. We asked if we could, and then we pivoted to do that. And I'm very thankful that Wizards of the Coast was willing to let us pivot and talk about the things we wanted to talk about, which also went to go further to prove that, like, the right people were in the room and online, because they were bringing the real questions and the things that people wanted to hear, not just blindly taking all like, oh yeah, thanks, tell us more about your cool new shiny toy. So that was, I think, a really good point, that the right people were there and present because the good questions were being asked. All right, so that's enough of me kind of level setting what happened or what was going on. Now let's talk a little bit about the day that happened. So I'm going to skip pretty much the virtual tabletop aspect, as that pretty much everything we saw in person in the room playing around with the virtual tabletop was exactly what you saw on the D&D Direct on the 28th of March. It was the exact same pre-alpha build. It was the exact same scenario, maps, monsters, minis, all of that. Even the same classes and everything. We got to do all the stuff you pretty much saw in that video, but we just got to do the actual clicking of things ourselves. Yes, I will tell you that the virtual tabletop, from my perspective, was relatively intuitive and easy to use. It functioned a lot like my Mind of Way Tailspire functions, which, again, I know this was a pre-alpha build. So because of that, like this, they said you normally wouldn't even see something like this, even in alpha testing. But because it looked so well and they were so proud of it and they wanted to get it out to show people, they released this pre-alpha build for us to play around in. So, like I said, it was intuitive. It was easy to use. I could move stuff around and kind of tell where all of the different aspects were. It was also linked to a D&D Beyond character sheet, although I didn't seem to have an opportunity to bring up like the full character sheet, and I don't know if that will ever be available. We also were playing on Alienware laptops. In some instances, I did notice a little bit of chugging there, but they did assure us that they were able to run the latest build on a cell phone. I don't know what cell phone. There's a lot of questions about accessibility in that, so we'll talk about that when we get to the afternoon session. But the second morning session was called D&D Beyond and Beyond, where we had sort of an open dialogue about the future of D&D Beyond. So they said, what has D&D Beyond been working on, and what does the future of it look like? And I got to tell you, there's some stuff here that I'm really excited about, and some stuff that actually from the creators in the room brought up that was completely eye-opening to me. And I basically am reading off a couple of different transcripts that folks have put out. I will link all of those transcripts in the description below if you'd like to read through them in their entirety. A variety of folks did put those out there. So this is just me kind of paraphrasing and adding in for my own live tweets, and then also what I saw online. So first up, they said they're getting rid of dnd.wizards.com. This is the main website that they've been using basically since the start of 5th edition to release. They used to release all their Unearthed Arcanas there, podcasts and other things, and they basically stopped using that entirely and said D&D Beyond gets 16 times more traffic, so we're going to use D&D Beyond as the method for us posting news updates. And we've kind of seen that since the OGL, where like article and other updates would just come out on D&D Beyond. Part of me thinks the reason it's getting 16 times more traffic is, one, because it's also D&D Beyond and people are going there for their character sheets, but also you stopped posting on dnd.wizards.com, so no one's going there because there's nothing to see. But the other thing that I will say is important is that you do archive somewhere everything that was there, like all of the old Unearthed Arcana. I'm going to actually go do this myself and download all of the old Unearthed Arcana and save them somewhere, because there's a bunch, and I've talked about it, done videos on these in the past, Unearthed Arcana that came out that never ended up in a final product that will just be lost to time if that website goes down. So I'm hoping that they'll do that. Plus they had like D&D Studio blog posts and things. I hope they save them somewhere. That was brought up in the room as well, so we'll see. What they've been working on is integrating all of the D&D Beyond folks into Wizards of the Coast, right? The merger happened earlier in the year. They had to onboard basically all of the D&D Beyond folks as now new WotC employees. Working on digital content drops, things like the Stranger Things related stuff, the Vectin dossier, the Monsters Compendium releases. And this was all really cool because they said going forward, they may be able to do more of this because there's less physical things involved with releasing just digital content drops like that. So I'm hopeful we'll see more things coming from D&D and D&D Beyond in the future. And then just product stability related stuff. What they're working on in the future is they want to increase the way D&D Beyond works, make it easier to play and easier to run, basically make everything more accessible. And this is kind of a theme over the whole kind of event, was more accessibility in more places. That's kind of what they want to have. They want more people playing D&D. They want it accessible and more people from different parts of the world, whether they speak different languages, whether they have different accessibility needs. They just want it everywhere, which is obviously what you want when you're a global brand. You want everybody to play it, but that's kind of what a lot of this different aspects of things we're talking about today and at that event were about. How can we get it out there in many places? Increase the mobile parity of D&D Beyond. There is a D&D Beyond app. However, the mobile version is distinctly different from the browser version, so they want to kind of bring those in line. They want to have more intro stuff, quick new player onboarding, have that be better. Pre-made characters, better options for DM intro adventures, one-click character creation. And then the other really interesting thing was this concept of an open marketplace for partners and publishers. This could be huge, and I have a couple of thoughts on this, and we don't have a lot right now, but they basically want to make it like a Steam marketplace where people can create their own books or modules on D&D Beyond and release them. Now, whether it seems like they do want to allow it, and I'll get to this in a specific quote, but they want people to be able to essentially market and sell things on D&D Beyond, similar to like the way a Steam marketplace works, where I can make my game, I put it up on Steam, you go and buy it, Steam gets a piece, and then I get a piece, and then I can make updates to it and what have you. That all sounds great, but the real question will come down to things like rights. You could technically kind of do the same thing with the DM's Guild, but it lives in a PDF that you download off the DM's Guild, and as such, you also give up your rights for publishing. You kind of lose half of your profit out the gate. And honestly, part of the reason why a lot of people want to do stuff on D&D Beyond is because so many people use it as their tool set for character creation that if it's not in there already, I've seen where people just don't even want to use it. I also wonder if this is a way for them to try to phase out the DM's Guild because of the fact that the DM's Guild is owned by Roll20, which in theory is a direct competitor to their own virtual tabletop. And if they could sync the virtual tabletop with D&D Beyond, then they could just try to use that as their own avenue that they have full control over. That's purely speculation on my point, but I wouldn't be surprised if it comes out being true. And then they're also going to work on back-end tech stuff to support everything we just talked about. They went in and said, what do you think we should build next? And then we want to open it up to a Q&A for all of the folks involved. So what they had gone on to say after that was, okay, what thing, we hear you. We want to see what else we can do there regarding the The homebrew functionality and the ability to market and sell these things, I believe it was Dan Rawson, who was the senior VP of Dungeons and Dragons, said an enthusiastic hell yeah about allowing you to have a homebrew marketplace. And a lot of their team have actually done set up third-party marketplaces with digital tools for a variety of different companies across the world and different video games. So there is a large history there of building these kinds of marketplaces and having them be useful. So I'm hoping that having that background will actually lead to a well-developed homebrew marketplace that works on D&D Beyond, that allows you to monetize things, and I think that could be done really well. The only concern I have is that D&D Beyond itself as a program is very limited in its functionality because of how it was designed. You can't do certain things with the homebrew. While it does have a decent amount of options, I couldn't build a level 1 to 20 class in D&D Beyond. That's not, I could build subclasses, sure, but it doesn't have a functionality for me to basically say, I want to start from scratch. Here's my level 1 to level 20 character. It doesn't give me an option to basically build like a rollable table for somebody to use. And a lot of that would be leaps and bounds if you're going to make this be part of D&D Beyond in a marketplace. And it does seem like that's where they're looking to go. It's just the logistics behind that, and then what kind of time frame it would actually take to roll something like that out. There are more plans for localized translations into other languages, as well as providing ASL translations, and they've also tested it out with screen readers as well for folks that are visually impaired and would like to have it kind of read things out, which is awesome to see. Again, improving this whole get it out to more people, have it be accessible, which I thought was pretty awesome. And something else I wanted to touch on, all of the digital aspects had ASL translators. So if people were attending the virtual, they were actually taking what we were saying in the room and translating it into American Sign Language, which was really cool to see. And I don't think I've ever seen that before from Wizards of the Coast. And later on, they confirmed that they will have captions and ASL translators for all Wizards-related events going forward, which is a really awesome step in the way of making everything seem more accessible to more people, which was pretty cool. All right, moving on. They talked a little bit about, again, so not only just D&D Beyond having a marketplace, but also the virtual tabletop will also have some form of a marketplace. We'll get to more on that in a little bit, but I just wanted to make that distinction that they both potentially will have a marketplace. Will they sync up at all? That isn't really determined, and we don't really know at this point, but they want the access to everything to be as broad as possible. So they said partnering is something we've done with a couple of great VTT partners out there. We're going to continue to do that, but they want to make sure that, they're also going to provide this for their own stuff, but still continue to support externally, at least probably for a little while. All right, moving on. There was a great conversation about folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And this is something that, again, was a huge eye-opener to me, something I hadn't even really thought of. One of my fellow creators in the room brought up that the cost in US dollars of a D&D book is about 9% of the monthly salary of the average person in India. So they also brought up that Steam has a really cool system where they sort of have pricing based on the region and the currency that you use, right? So if you were to go on Steam and buy a certain game, it would have a US dollar price, a euro price, a a pound price, a ruble, whatever. It has specific prices associated with the different areas. And if D&D is truly looking to be as diverse and as many places as they want to be, looking into a model like that would be a really great step in the right direction. Now, I will also say they seemed, at least in the room, receptive to having conversations with folks about this and working to build something like that in the future. And I do think that that would be a big step to show that, like, hey, we're looking to try to get this out there, and we do truly care about, folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I think that would be huge. So I hope they do actually follow up on the conversations had in the room and take that somewhere. There were some conversations about trying to bring future, older editions into it. I don't think that was really anything really marketed for that, because how are you going to do it? Just the logistics of the programming doesn't seem like it's going to work. We talked about localization. So then there was the concept of, well, you're going to do this virtual tabletop. You're going to expand D&D Beyond. What about the future of publishing in D&D as far as physical books? So they said the future is a very, very bright future, and we are committed to supporting that. We want you to buy the stuff once. And this was, people were saying, well, look, if I have it on D&D Beyond and I have a physical book, you're going to make me buy it twice. And basically what they said was no, and this kind of, we've heard a little bit about this in the past, they just don't know the logistics of how to make that work, which I do think is kind of a BS answer, because I have a couple of ideas here for you. But how can we pair, so you buy the book one time, you buy the physical book and you get it, right? I think a lot of RPG players are transmedia collectors, and that you like to have a physical representation of whatever it is. But honestly, in this currently evolving digital world, people also like to have a digital version. Now, because the way RPGs work, a lot of people like to have a physical book on hand, and you may never even actually look at that book. It might just sit on a shelf and look pretty, but you still want to have it, and then you also want to have a digital version as well. So they had said, like, if you put a code in a book, someone could snap a picture with their phone or just rip the code out of the book. And I agree with that, right? People will absolutely do that, right? It's on a shelf at a Barnes & Noble. Someone takes it out, snaps a picture. Cool, go home and activate it. Now they have the digital version. The person who goes and buys that physical book, now it is out of luck. So, I mean, base level, you could shrink wrap your books. I don't know what the cost involved with that is, but shrink wrap all your books. People can't get into it, but you'll also lose the opportunity of somebody just like walking by and casually flipping through a book in a bookstore. And I think you might get more people involved, especially if it's like a newer book with newer supplements and stuff. People want to flip through it there in the store. I think that you'd lose out on that. So I think what you do is you just keep a stack of codes behind the counter. Someone buys the book, you say, here you go, here's your digital code, go home and redeem it on D&D Beyond. And I had brought this up once before, but I was told basically, oh, people can just take those too. Well, at that point, isn't that just theft? Like regular old theft, and you can just deal with the proper authorities on that? Like if I have a stack of these codes, right? These are Pokemon cards, but let's just pretend I have these underneath my desk over here, right? Out of the way, so that, when you come and buy a book, I say, here you go. Here's your code, right? I give you that. And somebody like has to reach behind the counter, maybe distract me to take one of these codes. That's theft, right? At that point. So I think that point is kind of moot, but maybe you have some sort of QR code that's scanned, or you provide receipt information somewhere online, and that allows you to like legitimize the purchase that you made. There are ways to do it, and I feel other groups have already figured out how to do something similar to this. So I think figure that out. You're going to do a big solid to people if they can buy a physical book and get a digital copy as well. And if they are truly committed to that, I think they could probably figure that out with relative ease. We talked about the technical concepts of the virtual, the technical limitations of the virtual tabletop. They had mentioned in the D&D Direct that they were looking to possibly put it on consoles. And they actually brought up that they actually switched from Unity to Unreal 5 because it would better allow them to possibly use it on consoles. And again, that concept of getting it in more places is what they're looking for, right? So if it's available to be played on like an Xbox or a PlayStation, maybe even a Switch, they want to get it there if they can. Tablets, I don't know how realistic something like this on a tablet or a Chromebook is, but like they said, they ran it on a cell phone. Again, could this be a super massive souped up cell phone? Possibly. And how does it handle limitations in internet service and things like that? So I don't know. It will be a localized app. I do know that it will not be a browser-based virtual tabletop. It will be an app that you'll have to run like locally on your machine. So we'll see what happens when it ultimately releases. And friendly local game stores, libraries, and schools, right? They noted that over 9.5 million students have participated in their school program, and they want to continue doing this sort of work. So I thought that was a really kind of interesting conversation around D&D Beyond, but a lot of folks were like, okay, that was cool. When are we going to get to the real conversation? And then later on that afternoon is when we kind of dove into the virtual tabletop, which shocked a lot of us because we thought, again, the afternoon session was going to be about having, the feedback session. And it's like, well, we just played through the virtual tabletop for an hour. We also just went through more on the virtual tabletop in the Q&A session earlier. What else do you have to show us? And I thought this was an interesting choice because a lot of the stuff they couldn't answer because the virtual tabletop is at such an early stage. But they did tell us that the virtual tabletop efforts were started in 2021, given the pandemic. And like so many people were playing online, they were like, well, maybe we can do something. And that's when it started. So it's been in development for a handful of years at this point. And they kind of gave us a little breakdown of the roadmap of what they're going to be working on in the virtual tabletop. But they also said they want it to be simple and easy to play, remove barriers for entry. They don't want DMs have to feel like they have to learn an entire programming language to use this. They said, like, if you were to go on Google and type in tavern and get like a tavern map and get that, they want you to create and find a tavern map in the virtual tabletop to be as simple as searching it in Google. That's a pretty big statement to say. And if it ends up being that simplistic, that'd be a huge win for this virtual tabletop. But I ultimately think, accessibility and the ability to run it on a variety of different machines is probably more important than making it look good. So 2023 focus is going to be mostly focused on play, DM controls, UI related stuff, things that will allow you in early, play testing to be able to really kind of tool around with different aspects. 2024 focus is going to be based around characters, miniatures, textures, remixing things you already have. And then 2025 is going to be more on creation tools, the options for sharing, whatever kind of marketplace they're going to do, community feedback loop. And then they also had said they also have to work on concepts for like high-end magic that can totally just break the game, like Passwall, allowing you to create a door where there wasn't one. Teleport, where you teleport miles away from something. How does a virtual tabletop handle you just teleporting to another place that may or may not be determined? Which I never really thought about. That's pretty difficult stuff to program into it's basically making it into a video game, but how you program that when that can just happen. The virtual tabletop is currently in Wizards of the Coast Friends and Family playtesting. It will go to influencers in like a closed beta aspect, and then it might go further if available at the end of this year to like D&D Beyond subscribers in a more closed beta situation as well. Let's see. Again, we talked about cross-platform functionality. Then came the question from one of my fellow creators in the room saying, why are we here? And this is kind of where things started to pivot away, because it was where you brought us here to talk about and have conversations and a dialogue, and all you've been doing is kind of showcasing what you've been working on. Why are we here? This seems just like a PR event. And then that's when Wizards of the Coast kind of started to pivot things away, and we made the decision to let's divert the agenda talking about the 2024 rules update to focus on the conversations that we want to have. Talk about what everybody wants to say, and I'll get to what those questions were in a little bit here. So I will say a couple other things. Could you run other systems, Pathfinder, Project Black Flag, in the virtual tabletop? The answer was it's not designed for that, but if it uses dice and miniatures, it could possibly work. And then one of the other things was we talked about, again, could you use other things in the system? How's it going to work? Wow, I'm completely drawing a blank. Oh, they did say they wanted you to be able to use it to basically make machinimas and videos and things, which I thought was an interesting concept to say. Like, I didn't even know people still did that. They wanted to have a variety of different options for character creations to basically allow you to make your character look like whatever you wanted. And I think that's pretty much all we touched on regarding the virtual tabletop. I think, again, they might have a 2D version that is basically, they're looking into that because it's basically all now designed to be 3D, but it could possibly end up having a 2D top-down version if people want something like that. They also brought up, have you tested this out on a system running things like OBS to see how it will stream? And the answer to a lot of that was no. And from what I found out at a conversation later on that night was basically the main focus they were given is make it look really good, make it look pretty. And a lot of us were like, no, we don't really care how well it looks. We want it to play well. And the conversations that we had and the questions we asked about accessibility and, how resource intensive is this on your machine will hopefully allow the virtual tabletop team to get like compatibility labs, the opportunity to do things like testing machines and stress testing how hard it is. I also asked about like concurrent licensing, and they're looking to see how many people they'll be able to have on the server concurrently in the system. So they're working on all these kinds of things behind the scenes, and hopefully we'll get to see it in some form of a beta test that hopefully we'll be able to stream and showcase to all of you at some point in the near future. Then it kind of went to the supplemental Q&A, right? where we were starting to talk about other things that people wanted to hear about. So one of the opening things was talking about inclusivity in the gaming sphere. Is Wizards committed to including more diverse voices in their creative processes? Furthermore, are they committed to promoting or hiring marginalized people into decision-making positions on their product and executive teams? So, John Tell, who was their director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, she chimed in, and was her response to that statement. We want to hire the best people for the job. A fantastic game designer does not make a cultural expert. I want to be clear about that. A person of color does not necessarily mean that they are an expert in the broad academic experiences of people of color. Yes, we are absolutely always paying attention to a variety of representation questions and considerations within our workforce, promotion rate, performance, pay equity, etc. I want to create a workforce and a workplace where a person of color and marginalized gender or disabled person can be a game designer and never discuss that part of them if they don't want to. When we talk about hiring consultants, we're making sure that we're engaging with people who are experts. So that was kind of where we diverted more into our Q&A session. I also thought it was really interesting that a question was brought up about, you talk about how you want to hire diverse voices and just in general, but a lot of your executive level positions say that it requires 10 to 15 years experience. And realistically, almost anybody that was probably in that room has not been creating TTRPG content for 10 to 15 years. And I thought it was really interesting that their response was, well, it's just a suggestion. If you put 10 to 15 years experience as a requirement for, when you put something down as a job application, if it was just a suggestion, then have it say suggested 10 to 15 years experience or something along those lines. And I know from working, in a corporate situation, I know at my company, if it says you need 10 to 15 years experience on the job posting and your resume doesn't say you have 10 to 15 years experience, my company has like screeners a program that screens all of the resumes. So if you get 1,000 applications, this program will screen through all of them. And if you say like these are the base 5 or 6 things you need to have to be considered for the next set of the interview process, if it doesn't have that, the screening software will just automatically reject those resumes and only put the ones that say they have whatever the requirements are to go to the next step of the interviews. So if it says 10 to 15 years experience and you put down on your resume, you have 2 years experience, it might just automatically, and I assume Wizards of the Coast does something like this too, just kick it to the side and say like, okay, well, they don't have the experience. They don't get to move on to the next step of the interview process. Now, you could lie on your resume and say you do, and then kind of come clean on it in the interview, and that kind of gets you through to the interview process. But I like the concept that was brought up of we're looking to hire the people that are the best folks for the job, not necessarily the folks that have the most experience. And I know that might seem counterintuitive, but if I've been like an absolute rock star in the TTRPG space, hundreds of $1 million Kickstarters, I have, a ton of followers on my stuff. I have people constantly downloading, commenting, all this stuff. And I only have 5 years of experience. But there's somebody else who's been doing, in the position, doing TTRPG work for the past 10 to 15 years. And, they have a modicum of success, but I'm clearly like a standout breakout star and have been really innovating, coming up with a lot of new and unique stuff, maybe even designing my own RPG, all this other kind of things. And I only have 5 years of experience. I might be the better person for the job for like the senior game designer position over the person that has the experience, but they'll likely end up getting it just because they have experience. And I'm not saying that I don't, but I might be a better fit for the job. And I've seen this in my own personal life where some folks get a role, like a higher level role in the company, just because they've been in the company for a long time. Whereas somebody that's a lot younger would be a much better fit, or less experienced in the company would be a better fit for that executive role, but they're overlooked because they just haven't been here for a long enough time. And I like seeing that Wizards of the Coast is looking to pivot more towards hiring the right people for the job, less hiring the people that are just been here for a long time. So I think that that's a good step in the right direction, and I hope they do, I think that'll ultimately benefit all of us if more folks, the right folks, are hired for the jobs. All right. So again, we talked about hiring the best people in the various workforce, which was pretty awesome. All right. Then we moved on to comments on the OGL fiasco, the note of mistrust about D&D and the lack of confidence in Wizards of the Coast, and the resultant backlash creators face when they announce their attendance. We lost sight in the moment of the real fact that D&D is a dialogue. It's a dialogue between DMs and players. It's a dialogue between creators and community. It's a dialogue between Wizards of the Coast and the community. That being said, while I'm not happy at all with the trust we burn, I'm happy where we landed. I'm sad it took that to get us here. The fact that the SRD is in Creative Commons irrevocably so is the strongest signal that we are committed to keeping D&D open and inclusive, and we recognize that it is built on a community. Then we went on to hear from Dixon, again from the creator relations teams. There should never be a situation where you as a creator feel that you or your platform is in danger because of who you choose to work with. On top of that, as we said in the creator community update, we always encourage open criticism, but we want that criticism aimed at us, not at you. In that regard, we are looking at steps we can take to do that, but let me be absolutely crystal clear, we want that feedback aimed at us. And this is a really interesting concept because, again, as mentioned, right, a lot of folks were taking flack for just saying they were attending this event, but they want to, Wizards of the Coast wants to step in and help where they can. But the problem that we run into with this is you could possibly get into the situation where Wizards of the Coast stepping in and being involved in any way might actually exacerbate the situation by drawing attention. Right? If I say, hey, Wizards, Ted from Nerd Immersion are being harassed online for something, Wizards of the Coast makes a comment that says, hey, stop harassing Ted from Nerd Immersion. Now it's blown up to everybody that follows Wizards and actually makes the situation that much worse. And then a comment was brought up regarding, and this is something I wanted to address because it was misinformation was kind of being slung around about, saying that a creator was looking to say, why doesn't Wizards of the Coast provide healthcare options for content creators? And it wasn't that, right? It was, and I'll read some of the tweets here that kind of explain it. Let's see. I took the opportunity to give feedback to the executives directly. So seriously, in fact, it's the first time I've traveled on my own since, since the pandemic. I would not have done this if this had been presented as a PR event. One of the major themes in the questions I wrote about sustainability of the industry for freelance creators whose mental health and welfare, for health and welfare, both mental and physical, has regularly and substantially been threatened and or damaged by the consequences of decisions by D&D. Freelancers do not receive health insurance, but more importantly, creators have become a shield for companies and are often taking the brunt of these decisions by association. The issue to me is that those companies provide digital harassment tools and resources, health insurance, mental health support, etc., to their employees, but have zero support for creators. Even providing resource lists to contractors and freelancers and offering support if crisis occurs, if creators are getting death threats, DOS, etc., because of their work with the company, there needs to be some support because then we're all seeing this firsthand. And basically, I agree. I think there could be something along the lines of like a content creator packet, or whether it's a Google Drive folder, or just a list of resources and places you can go. Like, hey, if you're dealing with this, there are services and websites out there that would like delete your information from like contact lists that can be found online. And, maybe they just give you a list of those. Maybe they could give everybody that works for them or has content creation, whether it's freelancer or not, a coupon code or something. I don't know. That might be asking a little too much. But either way, I do think, some support for the folks out there, especially because, like I said at the start of this, people were getting all sorts of flack for just saying they were attending and becoming sort of the shield and taking the hit for Wizards of the Coast. But it does seem like the content and community relations team are doing their best to try to support and help the content creators in any way possible to make the focus of kind of the feedback and everything on Wizards of the Coast, not on the content creators themselves. Will creators retain their ownership rights of their user-generated content after everything from the OGL? Again, I think this is in relation to things like the virtual tabletop and D&D Beyond. The community has been heard loud and clear. What creators create and publish out to the world will be owned by the creators. Legal will be figuring out the language there, but this will be codified, right? So if I make something on the virtual tabletop or on D&D Beyond, can I own it myself? They're working on the legalese to make that happen so that you get to keep your own content. It won't get handed off. So again, proof in the pudding on that one. Kyle mentioned the spectrum of feedback they receive. This is Kyle Brink. And while they want to act on as much feedback as possible, some people may harbor negative feelings despite best efforts. No matter what decision we make, there are some people who think that that's the right play, and there are some people who think that that's the wrong play. Our job is to, as much as possible, make the game as welcoming as possible to as many people as possible, which means there's going to be some part of the spectrum that's going to feel excluded no matter what decision we make. And that doesn't mean it's cool to leave people out, but it means it's a fact of what happens. They're trying to do the right thing. They even brought up the species concept, right? We're trying out species and we're getting feedback on it, and we'll look at the feedback like we look at feedback on anything, and we'll land on an ultimate decision. I can't tell you what that decision is because we haven't finalized it yet. We're running it by the inclusion team as well. Another thing that was also brought up regarding all of that different information was the review process. So basically, how are you going to handle things like the Hattasy happened, right? How are you going to prevent something like that from happening in the future? And it was brought up that they have completely revamped and changed their internal review processes for sensitivity and inclusion. In the past, it seemed, which I thought was really odd, that it was completely arbitrary. Like if I create something and I'm like, oh, maybe this could be problematic, it was on me, the person who created it, to be like, let me send it to the sensitivity readers and just like, oh, what do you guys think? And that seemed bizarre to me, that it was purely arbitrary on the person who created it to decide whether something should be reviewed or not. And now it's basically everything is reviewed by multiple people. They have multiple sensitivity and inclusivity readers. Not everybody gets the same thing every time, so people are getting cross-pollination on that. Even if they're doing something like reprinting a book that they've already put out, like say Sword Coast Adventures Guide, and they're going to reprint it, which obviously we know they won't, but if they were, that will also get inclusivity reading and sensitivity reading. Even things like art will get that. Even sketches that may never see the light of day in a book are now also getting sensitivity consultants and folks to read it. And I actually met one of the sensitivity readers from Wizards of the Coast. It's actually somebody I knew personally from years ago that I met at Gen Con, and I just happened to bump into them at dinner that night. And I was like, oh man, what are you doing here? And he's like, yeah, I'm one of the sensitivity diversity readers for Wizards of the Coast. So I actually know there are real people there that are hired by Wizards as employees, not just consultants, which is pretty cool. So they are doing their best to try, and it does sound like what happened with the Hattasy would never happen again with the processes they have in place now, which is a good step to show that they are working to do better. This is something else that Wizards of the Coast I think needs to learn, is that an acceptable answer is, you know what? I don't know the answer to that right now. I'm going to go back to the team and find out, and I'll get you an answer when I can. That's an acceptable answer. I'd rather have you tell me you don't know and you're going to get back to me than give me some sort of non-truth, deflection, misinformation kind of answer. When you deflect and kind of it's very clearly a non-answer, that feels worse and like more deceptive than if you're just like, you know what, I honestly don't know. Let me look into it and get back to you. Especially because you're trying to have the creator relations team be more about getting information out to people. Truly say you'll get back to us and then do get back to us. That's a better way than just kind of deflecting or having a snippy, dismissive answer. All right, moving on. And AI was another thing, right? Are you going to be using AI in any way, Chat GPT or otherwise, in your creative process? And the answer is an unequivocal no. AI in terms of artwork and content we create is completely inconsistent with our process. Our process includes humans. It involves iterating with humans. We go back and forth with humans. So that's our process, and we aren't deviating from that. So you're not going to see AI content being used in any of our content, which is pretty awesome. So we know that it's going to be a human-based process. They're not kind of taking the cheap way out and doing something like having ChatGPT do all the work for them. So that pretty much covers, in my opinion, I think everything related to the separate AMA. But you can see there was a lot of really good conversations about what are you going to do to make sure we can keep our content? How are you going to prevent, poor decisions and bad content from making its way through? How are you going to make sure keep going forward? And all of that stuff was things brought up by the creators in the room. Wizards of the Coast had no intention about talking about any of that at all. And then again, that's why they had said in the community update, like, we need to bring those questions forward. It shouldn't be on you to do so. And then lastly, we pivoted to Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford talking about the 2024 rules updates. Now, this was interesting because there was a lot of misinformation regarding this as well. Because I know specifically that my face and a tweet that I put out got posted across like all of the D&D RPG Reddits saying they were canceling 1D&D. And that was never the case. They just decided to D&D. Well, 1D&D was always a code name for the 2024 rules update, the virtual tabletop, and the acquisition of D&D Beyond. That was all 1D&D was like the code name for that whole project. And they opted to say like, hey, we're going to give you the real name. And this is nothing new, right? All kind of major projects, tech projects and other things usually have like a secret code name so people don't know what it actually is. This one's a little on the nose as 1D&D, but either way. And when it ultimately is released into its final form, they usually drop the codename moniker and switch to a new name. Same thing with we saw like D&D Next became D&D 5e. They were gonna drop this all the time anyway, but ultimately it got a little confused because they're not gonna call it anything new. They're gonna just call it 1D&D. Or sorry, not 1D&D. They're gonna call it D&D 5e, same thing. Which I thought was an interesting choice, and I feel like people are going to end up calling it something different anyway. People may end up calling it D&D 5.5. It might just be the way it's designed now. It seems like it's going to basically be like when a movie releases and it has the same name, and you'll be like, "Are you talking about D&D 5e? You're talking about D&D 5e from 2014 or the 2024 version?" Which just sounds more complicated. Why not just call it 6th edition or 5.5? But whatever. We'll get into that here. So Jeremy Crawford did bring up that they never refer to D&D like players as their customers. They refer them as just fellow D&D fans. And they are going to work to have future sessions with content creators at future conventions and an open discussion about the 2024 rules as time goes on. So that was pretty exciting. So they gave us kind of an agenda slides. I'm going to see if I can pull them up because I think Taryn at Indestructible shared all of the slides on his Twitter. So here, I'll show you this right here. So here you can see Design Goals, Revising 5th Edition, 2024 Player's Handbook, Part 1, and so on. So this is what they showed off here, right? I don't know if you can see that, but basically here it says, easier to navigate, exciting new content, deliver on lessons learned, improve quality, improve art, ensure fans' voices are heard, continue 5th Edition. Now this is the one that kind of got blown up where it said, it's not going to be called 6th Edition or 5.5. It's a 2024 revision to 5th edition. It'll be compatible with other 5e products. Any term conversions will be included in the rulebooks, right? So, for example, like race to species, for example. And then Xanathars and Tashas will get special treatment. Now, what does Xanathars and Tashas getting special treatment mean? Well, they basically said that if you're going to have, they're going to switch and have certain aspects of Xanathars and Tasha's Cauldron are going to end up in the 2024 Player's Handbook. For example, it's going to have all 12 base classes, not including the Artificer, and each one is going to have 4 subclasses, which means that certain stuff from Xanathars and Tasha's are going to get brought into the base 2014 Player's Handbook, but anything that was left out of that will get compiled into a future book somewhere else. Now, Jeremy did say there will be a full rules glossary as well as an index at the back of the Player's Handbook, and there will also be one in the Dungeon Master's Guide that will contain D&D lore in a glossary for that. And then the PHB will have entirely new art throughout. The Monster Manual and Dungeon Master's Guide will have new art, but not entirely all new. So he gave us an example about what it means for 5th edition, and he said, you will be able to open up your Curse of Strahd and run it with the new core books. I might blow your mind with this next one. If you really want to, you can make a character with the 2014 Player's Handbook with options from Tasha's Cauldron and Xanathar's Guide and have that character at the same table as a character made with the 2024 books. This is why I say what we're doing has not been done before for the game. Continuing the concept of the fact that this was 100% a continuation of 5th edition and not something wholly unique here. So I thought that was an interesting concept to just continue to call it. I guess the main thing you'd have to do is you would not have, like, you'd have the rules conversions from 2024. I think the main thing is if you're playing with a 2014 character, just make sure you give yourself a feat at first level from your background. Your subclass levels and things might be a little bit off, and we'll have to see truly how backwards compatible everything is once we ultimately get into it. But you know, if one of your favorite subclasses for the cleric or the wizard don't make it into the 2014 Player's Handbook, right, because it's going to have only 4 and the cleric and the druid had more, those options will still remain in the 2014 Player's Handbook, which also means that you can just take those forward into the 2024 revisions. In theory, again, in practice, we'll have to see how it goes. All right, so here was this, right? 9 species, new backgrounds, feats, spells. Here are the species options, right? Human, dragonborn, dwarf, elf, halfling, gnome, Goliath, orc, and tiefling. Now, there was some stuff brought up about half-elf and half-orc not being present. I will read you kind of what was said there. And it was half-elf and half-orc aren't going anywhere. They just won't be in the revised version of the 2024 Player's Handbook. They'll remain in the 2014 PHB, D&D Beyond, and possibly the little excerpt we got from the character origins on Arthurcana. And Jeremy said, frankly, we are not comfortable and have not been for years with any of the options that start with half. The half construction is inherently racist, so we simply aren't going to include it in the new player's handbook. If someone wants to play those characters, they'll still be in D&D Beyond. They'll still be in the 2014 player's handbook. They also said that there would be a College of Dance Bard, not in this Unearthed Arcana that's coming out, which, by the way, in probably like a week or so, we'll be getting a new Unearthed Arcana, which will be the largest Unearthed Arcana yet, which will have all remaining 6 classes that were not included so far. So a big Unearthed Arcana drop coming in the near future. And again, the College of the Dance Bard will not be in that, but that is something coming in the future. Now, the question was asked about how the monk class is usually stereotypically the Asian class. So what Jeremy said is how we're handling the monk is connected to how we're handling all of the classes. Here's what I mean by that. The monk absolutely has had the problem, and that it has had that problem, again, stereotyping, and that has been something on our long list of things we're going to improve. In many ways, I think the core of this issue is that there's not enough non-European representation in other classes, and so one of the things we're doing is making it so that there's non-European representation in all of the classes, so that when you get to the monk, you no longer feel like, oh, this is the Asian class, and then we're doing the flip with the monk, we're ensuring that there is non-Asian representation in the monk class. They also said they're going to move away from key points and they're going to start calling it spirit points instead. I've also heard that people may say maybe it should be discipline points instead of spirit points. That, again, will be determined on what we ultimately get in the end. The 2024 Player's Handbook will be anywhere between 30 and 60 pages more than the 2014 version. Let's see. All right, moving on. We talked about how they originally wanted to use lineage instead of species, but their diversity and inclusion team was the one who actually landed on species instead. I don't really think species is the play here. It doesn't really roll off the tongue well. I think lineage would probably be a better call. Maybe they're trying to do it to just separate from other RPGs that use lineage. I don't know. Then they mentioned this whole concept of weapon mastery, which was really interesting. So this is going to be a new concept that will be present for things like the barbarian, monk, and fighter, and it's a new concept that's going to allow you to basically train and improve on your various weapons. So I'll show you, there is a table here. This, again, Taryn had shared this. You can see this table here called Mastery. And these mastery options here have all different names of different features. And this is something special that people that can get mastery abilities with weapons can unlock. They all have a different functionality. They didn't give us all of them, but like slow, for example, if you hit somebody with a weapon with the slow mastery, it lowers their movement speed by 10 feet. Now, I think this was supposed to be something to kind of even out martials with casters, because it kind of gives it like cantrip kind of options, like a little bit extra. Push knocks somebody back 10 feet. Puncture gives you advantage on the next attack against someone that you hit with the puncture ability. This would then, again, allow a rogue to sneak attack potentially. Flex is available on versatile weapons. It allows you to do the versatile damage with one hand. So, for example, a quarterstaff is a D6 bludgeoning, a D8 versatile. If it has the flex and you have the flex mastery unlocked on it, you could do a D8 damage with it with one hand. Short swords are going back to being martial weapons again. Tridents now do a D8, so they're actually better than a spear for once. They mentioned cleave basically functions like what you think. When you hit something, you'll get to keep going on to the next one. Graze was a really interesting concept for the greatsword, which basically gives you a floor damage, which is basically, even if you miss, you're still going to do a base amount of damage to the enemy that you missed, which I thought was a really neat option. And they said that fighters will have the ability to possibly swap. So you could put like graze on a mace instead of on a greatsword. Or fighters would have the option at eventually also to unlock 2 abilities, and then when they hit, choose which one they want to apply. You'll also see things here. The musket and the pistol are also now just core weapons in the player's handbook. They're not something locked behind the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is pretty neat to see. Again, obviously, they're pretty expensive, but I'm excited to see what happens from this. Now, as it stands right now, we don't know how you unlock a mastery, like what the process is to unlock them. Does it require just weapon training with the weapon over a period of time? I don't know, but I'm curious to see. And they did say things like they did change the light weapon rule So that's kind of two-weapon fighting is now a bonus action. But I think the nick property that's found on like a dagger basically allows you to make the bonus action attack with it and then still retain your bonus action. So if rogues are able to get access to that, you still may have that functionality, which was pretty neat. Okay. More core identity for the sorcerer and warlock in 2024. No core functionality kind of unit is like a problem for both of them at lower levels. So sorcerers are going to get Chaos Bolt for free, and then they'll have different ways to alter the way Chaos Bolt works. Warlocks are going to make a baby pact. That's Jeremy's term here at level 1, which will basically be your Pact of the Chain, Pact of the Tome, or Pact of the Blade. It also is going to let you choose your spellcasting ability modifier, which I thought was interesting. So like Pact of the Blade might be your spellcasting ability is Wisdom or Charisma. Chain might be Intelligence or Charisma, and the other one might be Intelligence or Wisdom. So you get an a little versatility there, which is really cool. And then again, you'll just have Eldritch Blast as a class feature, not as a spell. They also said they're going to still retain Divine, Arcane, and Primal spell lists, but some classes will have specific spells, like Fine Steed it'll like have a caveat that says it's Paladin only. That just sounds like unique spell lists to me. I don't know why you're making this more complicated, but whatever. Both the DMG and the Player's Handbook will have Session 0 and Safety Tool information. The 2024 Monster Manual will be the largest monster manual ever created for Dungeons & Dragons. We'll have 500 monsters in it. It will also have all of the like CR 10 plus monsters reworked to make them more dangerous and lethal. It will also have more what they're calling Apex monsters, which are monsters of CR 20 plus for things that are not typical. Like usually have CR 20 plus dragons, fiends, celestials. And we'll now get things like like Fae, Ooze, Elemental, etc. It'll have, again, mostly new art in the monster manual. They're also looking to adjust subclasses and things that could be disruptive, right? If there's a certain aspect or a certain feature that's very confusing, adds a lot of confusion to the game, slows things down, or, a character is able to just steamroll through the encounter, basically making the other party members feel useless. They're looking to kind of address that to kind of give everybody a little bit more of an even playing field in 2024. Gelatinous Cube will be found under G in the monster manual, no longer under O. They're all going to have larger typefacing in them. I think that's just to make it easier to read, but I have seen people already saying they're doing this just to overinflate the page count, but take that with what you will. Chris Perkins said the DMG will be more show than tell. It'll give you more adventure style writing. It'll teach you more about how to actually run a campaign. And I thought that was really interesting because we don't really have a lot of that in the existing one. They also said, like, nothing's going to be a surprise to you. You'll get a lot of this information in the Unearthed Arcana. When stuff's going to come in and out of the rules glossary, you'll have plenty of advance notice so you can build around that. We're going to have pricing for magic items coming in 2024, as well as a new Bastion system for spending gold on, like, player housing and bases. Planescape will be a box set. It'll have 2 different versions, similar to Spelljammer. A 96-page Gazetteer, a 96-page Adventure, and a 68-page Bestiary. A little bit better than Spelljammer, but not enough in my opinion. We'll likely also get a Monstrous Compendium launch to go alongside that to give you 10 more monsters. Chris Perkins said that the revised DMG will answer 3 major concerns. What's in the DMG? How do I find it in the DMG? And I don't use the DMG other than magic items. They're looking to address all of those things. Giving options for DMs to answer questions like, hey, what if a player can't make it? What if I'm dealing with DM burnout? All that kind of stuff. They also showed us a little bit of new art, but I think I've pretty much touched on everything that was done in this event. So I hope I've done a good job and answered most of your questions, or at least gave you something to think about. And funnily enough, after remaking this video 11 different times, this one ended up being the longest version, which is kind of just funny to me. But that being said, let me talk to you a little bit about my experience and what I thought. A thing I didn't mention is we did get some swag, a couple of different collector's edition cover books. Nothing crazy, though, like Tales from the Radiant Citadel and Keys from the Golden Vault. We got a D&D board game and then like some little tchotchke stuff. We did also go to a board game house for dinner where we did have dinner and you could mingle with the D&D staff. And they gave us a gift card to the board game cafe, which was kind of nice. And then I did spend a lot of time talking to a variety of different folks at dinner about different aspects of D&D. It was also really cool to hear that a lot of the D&D team, including the D&D Beyond team, watch a lot of my videos. So if you made it to the end and you're from Wizards or D&D Beyond, hello. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. But it was just good to see people, right? Content creators. That was probably my favorite part of this whole event, was just getting to meet these new people. Some of them I know through reputation. Some of them I know because like we've commented on each other's tweets or YouTube videos, or we're in the same Discord server or something and had a little bit of back and forth, but I never actually had the opportunity to sit down and meet them. And now I feel like my friend group in the TTRPG space has significantly expanded. I feel like I have people that I could talk to, I could bounce ideas off of if I want to work on future projects. I feel like I have new people to reach out to, people that I can say like, hey, do you want to get together and play a game? If I want to stream something, I can have possibly people to join, or just to play a game for fun. And that was probably some of the best times, was just hanging out, getting something to eat, having a drink, playing D&D Trivial Pursuit, and having way too much alcohol to decompress from the day, and no one's going to be able to take those moments away from me. And that was absolutely my favorite part of the whole event. But we were all in the same hotel, so like you'd be going down to the lobby to get something or going to get breakfast, and you'd bump into a bunch of the other creators, and we all sat together. And it was a really cool aspect to have that. So I hope Wizards of the Coast continues these D&D creator summits. I hope that, like I said, we're going to have an opportunity to go in and deal with the lessons learned about stuff that happened in the past, and we'll get to continue talking about, how they've gone and improved and what they're executing on to show that they're improving from what they have done, and what even just the things that were discussed at this Content Creator Summit. I hope I answered your questions. If you have them, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'll do my best to answer them. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.